Hello everyone, welcome to chapter number 3 of the Economic Case Studies seminar. So the purpose of today's lecture is to cover the most important parts of the chapter 3, and the title of this chapter is Interdependence and the Gain from Trade. So our main focus in this chapter is about trade, basically, and it's you can think about it as a trade of goods and services between two or more countries, and we will see how countries depend upon each other on a daily basis, as well as for the productions of goods and services at the global level. So the word interdependence is very important here. That's why they have added to the title of the chapter. What it emphasizes that we as an individual being, also as a nation, as a country, we have to depend upon each other. So if you are an individual, we have to depend on other individuals in the society. And even if you are an independent nation, we still somehow depend on the economy of other countries, and they are also dependent upon our country and upon our economy. So this interdependence is going both ways, so it's in the both direction. And the second thing about the title is the gains from trade. So if you could only take one important message from this chapter, is that trade is beneficial to everyone. We will go much into detail why it is that, but first an important thing, there is also a survey at the end of the chapter. They have asked economists, for example, if trade is beneficial for United States to have a trade with China, and 100% of the all famous economists, they said yes, trade is beneficial. We will cover in this chapter why trade is beneficial, and it will have several topics. So first, I think I will be talking about production possibility curve or production possibility frontier, that we shortly talked about it in the last in chapter 2, and that was also part of the assignment. And yeah, that's how we will start our today's class. And then we will use the knowledge from production possibility frontier to go to our second topic, which is about comparative advantage. And we will talk about that with some definitions. And lastly, there are some topics about the application of international trade, how international trade is being implemented today in the society. Okay, so I will briefly start about the interdependence first. So as you know, as an individual, we even if you think about a very primitive society, like in early centuries, as a human being have evolved, even on the early stages, human beings were dependent upon one another. For example, if I could give a classic example, a baker who's making bread, he would depend on a tailor to make his clothes, and also on a shoemaker who would prepare a shoe. So for one person, it will be very difficult that he bakes bread for himself or for his family, and also he's able to tailor, or he's able to make and produce clothes for himself. And it's also would be very difficult for him, for example, to prepare shoes for himself. So in that case, what is the beneficial, what could be done to make everyone better off, is that this baker is baking bread for everyone in the society, and then he exchange his bread either through money or even directly with the tailor, who is another guy in the society whose job is only to make clothes. So he will give some bread to the tailor, and in exchange he will receive clothes. And the same thing he can also do with the shoemaker. So he can give some bread to the shoemaker, and then the shoemaker will give him a shoe so he can wear. And in that case, you see that the society as a whole, they are interdependent upon each other. And if they engage, or if this person or if this baker is engaging in this act of exchange, so he's actually, for him, it is very much beneficial. So he get benefits from the tailor as well as from the shoemaker. And life is, in a simple word, it's much more easy for him to do so instead of making his own clothes and making his own shoes. So with this example, this could be applied also to the nations, to the societies, and to the different countries. That different country could also produce the goods which they are good at producing it, and then exchange with each other, so both of them will benefit. Okay, so that's the main idea, and that's the main idea of the interdependence and trade. So trade is beneficial for each participants of the trade. Why? We will talk about it in more detail in the coming topics. Okay, that was one example. We also said in our first principle clause that one of the principle was that trade can make everybody better off. So it's one principle of economics, and based on this principle, we can dig in more details in this chapter, and then we will come up with a better solution and understanding. Okay, so now I will talk about the second topic, which is about production possibility frontier or production possibility curve. In a simple term, it shows if there are two goods that one person could produce, given his own resources, how many of different combination of these two goods that one person can produce. So this graph, this curve, actually, production possibility frontier or production possibility curve, is just a line which shows different combinations of goods and services that someone could produce. In a book, there is an example of a farmer and a rancher or a butcher, and it's very much recommended that you read this example in detail so you can have a numerical example and evidence to see how it works. But I will only, just to explain this, for example, one of them is called Frank, who is the farmer. So his production possibility curve, it's a line that just shows how many ounces of meat he can produce and how many potatoes he can produce, given that he's working 8 hours per day. So this production possibility curve, it shows different combination of these two goods that this person could produce. So it's just a declining line, and yeah, I'm not well prepared for the slides, but here you can see that there is a downward sloping line, and that's the production possibility curve of a person. Okay, so you can see it in the slides and also in your note, in your chapter of this book. Okay, so I will briefly talk about the example in this chapter. So it says like there is one farmer and then there is one rancher or a meat producer. Both of them could produce tomato and both of them could produce meat. But probably the rancher is much more efficient in producing meat, and the farmer is much more efficient in producing potato because he's a farmer, so he is good at farming. So if they are separated, if they don't trade with each other, so the farmer will produce potatoes, which is he's good at it, and also a little bit of meat, but for him it's very difficult to produce meat. On the other hand, the rancher or the butcher, so to say, he's very good at producing meat, so he can produce meat in a very efficient way and a lot of quantity of meat, giving less amount of time. But he can also produce potato, but he's not good at producing that well. So each of them, they have their production possibility curve showing how much meat and potato each of these two people could produce. Now comes the topic of trade. So how the situation will change if they trade with each other. As I said, the farmer is good at producing potatoes and the rancher is good at producing meat. So if they somehow engage in a trade in a way that the farmer will only produce potatoes, so his whole day, 8 hours of work is dedicated at producing potatoes, and this rancher guy, he is spending his whole day, 8 hours of work producing meat, and then they can exchange some meat for potatoes and potatoes for meat. So the farmer will give some potatoes to the rancher, and then the rancher will give some meat to the farmer. And that way, as a whole, if farmer is only producing potato and the rancher is only producing meat, so they have more efficiency in that. So that's why they can produce much more amount of it if they were producing a combination of these two goods. As a result, what happens is that once they engage in the trade, they exchange potatoes with the meat, their production possibility curve will move to the right, or they will reach a point which is to the right side of their production possibility curve, as you can see it in the figure 2 in the chapter. So you can see that because they are engaged in a trade, now they can produce much more amount of meat and potato as compared to before, when each of them were producing for themselves, but they were producing very little. So that's just one example of how trade could be beneficial. If you see this figure 2, on the bottom of this chart, it's written gains from trade, and then you can see that there's 1 ounce extra meat produced and 1 ounce of extra potato has been produced for Frank, and also 1 ounce of meat and 3 ounces of potatoes has been produced by Robbie, who is the ration guy who's producing meat. So as a result of these all exchanges, what happens is that both parties win, so there is more meat and more potato, and because they are sharing it, so they reach a point which lies to the right side of their individual production possibility curve, and it shows that they are more efficient, and that point, for example, it's called A star in the book. So that point was not achievable if they were not engaged in a trade, but now because they are engaged in a trade, they are achieving a point beyond their production possibility curve. Okay, there are some more details about it, and I think you can go through it, and then you will have a better understanding of the production possibility curve. So I will come to the second topic. It's called comparative advantage, the driving force of specialization. Okay, so when the farmer was producing potatoes, so he became more specialized in that producing of potatoes, and the same was the case for the rancher or for the butcher. So this specialization actually, if you're putting all of your energy in one thing, then you're more efficient in producing that thing. So that's how these two concept of absolute advantage and a comparative advantage comes from. Okay, let's go through these three definitions, and then once these definitions are clear, we will be able to discuss them in more detail. So what is absolute advantage? In a simple word, absolute advantage, if there are two students and they are studying two subjects, English and math, for example. So if student A is good at both math and English, and student B is, compared to student A, not good at English as compared to A, and not good at math as compared to A. So he is not good at anything, or as compared to person A. In that case, we say that the student A is an absolute advantage as compared to the student B. So student A is good at both math. He's also good at the English subject as compared to the student B. So student A has an absolute advantage. So that's the definition of absolute advantage. In the book, it's defined as the ability to produce a good using fewer inputs than another producer. So if you use little inputs could be like your energy, your time, your resources, your machines, or whatsoever. So if you are good at using a very limited resources, but you can produce much more as compared to another person, then you have an absolute advantage. I can also give an example of car making companies. For example, there is Mercedes and there is Volkswagen. So they have the same employees, the same car producing factories, the same amount of employees and everything. But if, for example, given all the resources for both companies, Mercedes is producing a lot of much more cars in a month as compared to Volkswagen, we say Mercedes has a comparative advantage over Volkswagen. Why? Because their inputs are the same, their car factory are the same, but Mercedes is able to produce a high quantity of cars as compared to Volkswagen. So what happens here is that, I'll get some water. So what happens is that Mercedes is more efficient because it uses the same resources but can produce a lot of cars. Okay, the next topic is about the opportunity cost. So I think at the first chapter we defined what is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost in simple word is whatever you give up to achieve something else. And the first example which I said about the potato, the farmer and the rancher. So for the farmer, if he's producing potatoes, his opportunity cost of producing potatoes is the amount of meat that he has foregone in order to produce potato. So he said, okay, I will not produce meat because I'm not good at it. I will produce potato. So whatever meat he said I will not be having, that is his opportunity cost of producing potato. In simple terms, opportunity cost is whatever must be given up to obtain some item. So whatever that you have given up so you can achieve something else, that is the opportunity cost. And this opportunity cost is basically the main idea behind comparative advantage. I will say it in a general way and then I will try to explain it. So if you have if your opportunity cost is much, or if you have higher opportunity cost, then you have a comparative disadvantage in production of that thing, of the second good. Okay, I will try to explain it in a more simple way. So this concept of opportunity cost is related to comparative advantage. And I'm looking at, probably I will read it from the book so it's much more easier. So economists use the term comparative advantage when describing the opportunity cost faced by two producers. The producer who gave up less of other good to produce good X has the smaller opportunity cost of producing good X and is said to have a comparative advantage in producing it. So if you have a higher opportunity cost, then you should more concentrate on the goods that you're producing, that you're good at producing it. So higher up, if you have a higher opportunity cost, then you should. Okay, we'll take a break.